Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Dave Dobbs here. It's Monday, 11th of March, 2019. And I want to show you what I call a miracle. A little bit of cosmic alignment, a little bit of magic, absolute magic, real magic. I mean, you know, it is what it is. It is what it is. I think it will blow you away. I mean, there's certain things that you might doubt in the story. And it's easy to doubt. It's easy to doubt. But what I'm going to show you is that. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that clearly. I can barely see it clearly. What about if I hold it closer? Does that look? It's completely reversed to me, so I'm not too sure what you're actually seeing there. But it actually says 1565-08. That's what I can see, but when I'm actually holding it up to the screen like that, it's actually reversed, so it doesn't look like that number at all. But anyway, that's what I got. God knows what that looks like actually. What does that look like in reverse? By the way, that's quite interesting because it's I literally see that in reverse. How mad is that? Are you seeing that in reverse? I'm sure you're not. Wow, how mad that I am though. Anyway, 1565-08, and what happened was I'd left some money I'd left my last euros in a bank account in France when I come back to England. So when I come back to get my caravan, there's enough money to do whatever I come here to do, whether I come here to stay, to sort of get prep for the next big flyby, whatever I decide to do. The last of my cash is there, so I could either bring my caravan back, or I've got, you know, a few months of survival out here to work out a plan, or, you know, I really don't know how or what I'm meant to do in this process, other than do what I've been doing, which is chartering this Planet X timeline. And I'm very finicky about all the dates, aren't I? If you watch me in my process. And when I saw this, what happened was I went down to check on my bank balance, see if I could afford to actually take this caravan back to the UK. And if I take it back, what the hell am I going to do? And what's my plan of action? You know, we've got about 20 days till Brexit. And I was just watching these videos in the actual European Parliament of the politicians, the MEPs talking about MEPs, the European politicians, you know, from all the member states, talking about what would happen if Britain didn't get a deal, or they couldn't vote on a deal, they couldn't vote on leaving with or without a deal, that they had no choice but to push Article 50 back to avoid breaking out of the euro with absolutely no deal, no trade deals whatsoever. So to terminate so much business, or to risk the termination of such business, and to create so much fear in the market at that time, it could go any which way. And so they were talking about an extension, and all of the MEPs all said, all the European politicians, like I'm saying MEPs because I'm, for some reason, but that might be military police or something like that. But I might be incorrect there. Excuse my absolute lack of ignorance there, because I always shoot myself in the foot in the most silliest way. But the European, the officially elected European politicians in the European Parliament were all kind of like, all the ones that were not English were basically saying that if you do extend Article 50, all of them were saying this. And I'll play you some excerpts. Maybe I'll play you some excerpts. Maybe that will bore the hell out of you. Maybe you just need to take my word for it. They're all basically saying that if Britain extends Article 50, then they're still in Europe, which means that they have to give democratic the right of a democratic voice during the elections. There has to be an election. There has to go ahead with it. And of course, the British politicians were a bit like, well, I don't think we really want to do that. And of course, they were saying, well, no, if you're still part of Europe, you don't have to have elections, which kind of put a little notion in my head. Anyway, that's my door closing. I might just put a stick up to keep the light coming in. Stay there. Sorry about that. So anyway, that when I just came back to my caravan this morning, I just walked in and I'm tatting everything down. It's been such a massive job to try and tat everything down and going through the whole process that I kind of going through. Every time I leave the mountains here, it just does my head in. I love it so much. And up here, it's a beautiful space. It really recharges my batteries up here when I come up to the mountain. So I obviously really need something here. And but this bit of paper was there 1565, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put share here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to see if this works. We're going to go onto my desktop and share. I'm trying to upgrade my ability with Windows, with Zoom, and using other kind of broadcasting kind of like systems. And you've all kind of watched me develop what I call a 200-day timeline. But the problem with the 200-day timeline before was that every time that we went 2 full cycles of 200 days, because we kept seeing these sightings 200 days apart. And I've just got 1577 up here because because obviously this date is 1565, or 1565 was the amount that was written on the piece of paper that would look like it had been left on my seat in my caravan, as if someone had left their telephone number or something like that. And I was curious, and I suddenly thought, oh, that's the bank balance, that's the euros, and to get me home. And then I kind of like looked at it and I thought, oh my God, that's very, very, very close to 1577. And now this date comes because of, like I say, when it came to 2 lots, I run this kind of like this every 200 days running from the 5th of August 2011 up to now, and every time the date comes up, that sure enough you see we've had another flyby, and I've done it over and over and over again, haven't I? Many times, because this thing moves in very cyclic motions, and so it's very easy to calculate. And I was of a mind, let's go back to let's take this back to whilst we've got it on screen here, let's take this back to where I was imagining that we would pass the ecliptic last time round, where it would pass us. So let's just go back a year from there and come back to where I assumed it was going to fly by on the 21st of January this year, 2019, somewhere between the sort of like late December 2018 and January the 21st, 2019, which is this period here, which I've got marked up here. And obviously, we had all these incredible sightings of it, just as I said we would, just like I've said we would with all of the flybys before. And then I predicted the big tsunami just before, and I said expect oceanic anomalies because of this period where you can see the if I move that maybe over here a little bit, so we're not hopefully, maybe I need to put it up there because we're less likely to clutter the image. But And so this image here, this is where I was imagining it was going to be our closest point because of all the other sightings and everything else like that. And sure enough, Krakatoa blows its top off, and it's called it's basically kind of like it's demoted to a mudslide. I mean, the whole top of the volcano has completely blown itself off and it's demoted. And yet, if we just quickly go back here to this period over here, just before where we get, obviously, Opportunity rover shuts down because of the dust storms. Look how close it is to Mars there. And then we go a little bit further, and this is the point where, obviously, the magma was spewing out of Kilauea. I can never say it. I'm so sorry. But the massive volcano on the big island in Hawaii, Kilauea, I think it is. But excuse me if I pronounced that incorrectly. But you can imagine all of this is when my 190, because of that sighting there, because of if we keep going forward, because of that, and because of this sighting, because of all this information, it completely contradicted my model. My model was correct right up until that point, and then suddenly we get all these anomalies. There'd already been anomalies that I couldn't explain in my existing model of 198 days or 200 days. But like I said, every 4 years, like I said, it would fly by on the 25th of January 2017, and on Trump's inauguration on the 21st, that's when it flew by. These 4 days, and it keeps coming up over many times. I'm 4 days out, and I have to drop it back 4 days, and I realized so that's how I overall calculated that. Though I can find these positions on 109 on a 200-day timeline, it's like every time I predict it, I'm always this 4 days out, and it creates this difficult thing to work out, and you're not too sure how to juggle that without overly manipulating the figures. But you have to present your data in such a way where you're not tampering with anything. You're just running consecutive numbers, like the moon going round every 29.25 days, or whatever that cycle is. So we see this. So we're not trying to distort, or we're not trying to be a statistician and trying to make things do silly things. It's just it's absolutely straight. It's laid on in plain black and white sort of thing. A very simple process that I've offered here. Except that obviously this period, this period round here, it threw a spanner in my works, and it made me realize this is actually 2 cycles. It's revealed itself as this 198 200-day cycle, but without finding that, we wouldn't have been able to find that it's actually 2 of those kind of cycles makes one big cycle, which is a 396-day cycle. Now, ironically, is if you take 396 and you divide it by 13, it's like 30 point whatever days. But when you take that exact figure that is and you times it by 12, it is exactly 365 days, which means that, like I said in my last video, this thing exhibits an exact month longer cycle of rotation, if you like, around our sun and around planet X. You see here we've got the twin tail object coming around. It's not just going around the sun here, it's going around the planet X system with the blue Kachina. That's Venus just going past the system there as well, but in that frame. But you can see that the what some call the red Kachina and the blue Kachina sit in that kind of like February-March position. Now, here am I thinking, what am I going to do? What's my plan of action and that sort of stuff? And then I see this up here, and I'm just thinking, because of the new upgraded pathway, because we'd realized it had come all the way around the sun, all the way around planet X, but all the way around the sun also, our sun also, just like Earth, on a much more kind of elliptical orbit, admittedly, because it's going through on a different ecliptic plane. So it's not that the orbit of this is warped. It's just at an angle compared to the Earth's ecliptic plane. So if we come back to this point where I thought it was going to occur, And all the evidence, we had all the evidence. I knew it was going to fly by. Sure enough, it flies by. It's absolutely massive. I mean, look at it. It's as big as I imagined. I thought it couldn't get much closer than that. But then, so we have to go through another year, and then we come to and then I put in, and then the next grand crossing. Will this be the last? Truly, I do not know. I simply charter its movements. But this takes us to kind of like late. It kind of takes us to, I suppose, what would you call it? December 2019, December this year to January next year. But then I thought, well, if we then go forward to this is as a result of the movements of and the sightings that we see of this twin-tail object, we could see that there was consistent patterns that meant it hadn't come over the top of the sun in the kind of 15, 20 year period that as I had originally thought. It had actually very slowly come through the ecliptic plane of our solar system at a pretty much consistent angle, which means it had already passed through the ecliptic previously. And this was Carlos Ferrada's prediction on the, and I know that many of you have heard this before, but I'm going to blow you away with a miracle as a result of this simple this balance that that bank gave me the other day, this little cosmic communication from the universe. Because if we go forward to, I'm just going to move the icon around over there. If we go forward to, we might have a little look at some of these, but we were going to go forward to 1577. And, you know, we had a comet at that time on the 13th of November. You know, we had this, you know, it was like, it was seen like a dragon in the sky. But let's go back to that, 1577. And I thought, well, what happened in 1577? But what happens if I was to take 12 days off? Because that's 1565. I thought, well, what happened in 1565? Because you can imagine that, as I've just shown you, if this year, I'm not like 1 year out, I'm just calculating this as this goes and seeing bigger sightings of it and predicting its movements and getting more and more understanding and be able to build this much bigger, not 200, what started on a 200-day timeline has now evolved into what we can now project into literally a 2,000 line timeline, 2,000-year timeline, and really look at some pivotal events. And I just thought, well, what happened in 1565? So I went to the old Edinburgh encyclopedia. I'm not too sure how old it is, but it was. Let's just go down to 1565. Have I gone past it there? 1569. It must be on that side. 1565. The revolt of the Low Countries. And I thought, and then just before it says comet appeared on February the 25th. Remember the big 8.8 earthquake happened the 27th of February in Chile in 2010, you know, and then, you know, 2011 on the 13 days later on the 11th of March 2011, you have Fukushima, and we'd had sightings all around this time of comets as well. But this isn't the bit that's going to blow you away. This is going to get a little bit interesting. So I thought, well, 1565, and I thought, well, what else happened around there? A large comet appeared in October. Drake circumnavigates. War against the Protestants in France, 1573. The massacre of the Protestants in Paris. What's happening here? Queen Mary defeated in the Battle of Glasgow, 1568. Now, Queen Mary defeated. Now, that can be very confusing because Queen Mary restores popery in England, 1553. So so we can see these two Marys as the same Mary, but actually this Mary is Mary, Queen of England. This is Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, whoever you thought those two were the same? Because if you look a bit further down here, I'm not too sure where, but you'll see obviously that Queen Mary dies because Elizabeth is going to take the throne at some point around here. Mary arrives in Scotland after an absence of 13 years. Ah, there it is. I'm so sorry about that. So 1558, a comet appeared in August. The French take Calais, January 8th. Queen Mary dies November the 17th. Okay, so that's going to be the same time as remember, Elizabeth was locked in the tower waiting for Mary to give birth, because if Mary gave birth, they would have an heir, a legitimate heir to the challenged throne of England, because remember, Mary had been divorced by Henry, so Mary's mother had been divorced by Henry. Is that it? Catherine, his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had Mary, and he divorced her. So there was a challenge that Elizabeth then was in line for the throne. But if once Mary had had a child and she was pregnant, at least I thought she was pregnant, she would have delivered an heir. She'd restored popery. That was the new sovereign rule. And this kind of new Church of England going in the direction of complete Catholic control again. And then when she goes to give birth, it turns out she's got a cancer in her stomach and she dies. And Elizabeth is brought from the Tower. So this kind of like this confusion there. I'm so sorry. I knew that I do know my history about all this sort of stuff, and it's really quite. We often get our Queen Marys really, really confused. And this is when, obviously, Queen Mary's coming back, and she's now, the Catholics, and now this is their only chance of kind of bringing back a kind of like taking control of the Bible through Mary, Queen of Scots. And of course, who was her son? Charles, I think it was Charles I. No, hang on, was it Charles I? Charles, who put together the first Bible after Elizabeth? The King James, not King Charles I. Charles I was defeated by Cromwell, who and of course Charles I tried to kind of reenact popery, as they're calling it here in this encyclopedia, and then of course Cromwell kind of steps up and suppresses it again. So we have this kind of cycle of the Catholic Church desperately trying to take over and bring about all kind of like hell on this earth, and then they get suppressed. And maybe you could see it from the other way, but nonetheless, when I went to 1565, the revolt of the Low Countries, the Turks attack, blah blah blah. Comet appears 1564. I saw that, and I was not kind of like, I was thinking, if going back to this cycle, if we're to assume that I was 1 year out, or this thing this has got another grand crossing coming up around about the 21st of January 2020. But you have to understand that creates this cycle here going around, takes actually 1 full year longer, if you can imagine, because I was running it from the 21st or the 20th of January 1939, Carlos Ferrada's big prediction when he said it would pass, and we had the earthquakes, thousands and thousands of people died exactly where he said it would occur. We had all the evidence, all the sightings, everyone was talking about it. It was Planet X was massive then, and then it doesn't come back over. He said it would reappear in 1999, and we get Comet Halley-Bopp in 1997, 98. I think it's Comet Halley-Bopp, and then I start showing all these other comets, and then I start seeing the 200-day timeline, and the rest is that we finally come into this big cycle that takes about 337 years, but it's looking now maybe to take 338 years. So I have to think, oh my God, so all these dates, 1565, when I go back to 1565, I'm going back 12 days on 1565. But of course, if I go back one cycle, I've got to go, for every one cycle I go back, I've got to go back a day. So if I go back 5 cycles, I've got to go back 5 days. So 1577, is the 10th crossing. So 10, 11, 12, 13, which we're on now. So I've got to go back 3. So I've got to go back to 1570. What is it? 1574. So I thought, well, let's just see what happened in 1574. And you're gonna honestly, where this is gonna go. So let's go and have a quick look at 1574. The Spanish besieged Leydon. What is it? Sebastian of Portugal's expedition against the Moors in Africa. I don't know. It's just like nothing really stood out, other than I just go back a year before and I got the war against the Protestants in France, massacre of the Protestants in Paris. You know, a league between Spain, Venice, and the Romans. You know, we can see that there's a massive, great build-up of war against this alternative Christian truth that is trying to surface, this Protestant truth, this Protestant truth. The protesters wanted to have a Bible in a language that they could understand, so it didn't have to be rammed down their necks by a third party, so they could access the scriptures directly and interpret them, the scriptures themselves. So this is this big battle, this big split in the church that we're talking about here. So okay, so I thought 1565, I thought the only one I could go 12 days back on is, well, I'll show you. I'd have to go back to 687. No, I'd have to go back further than that. I'd have to make it 12. Once you actually go back 13, full 13, you go back to the time of Christ. You know what I mean? So you'd have to delete 13 days off whatever the timeline I put there for this one. But let's just stick with, we're going to come back up to here. (274). Let me just move that now over there. Second ecliptic crossing. So the second ecliptic crossing would be 12 behind. You could actually deduct, like the 1565, you could actually deduct 12 days, and that would be the time of the crossing for this one. So I thought, well, let's go to 274. Let's go to see what happened in 274, just on this little, am I going in the right direction? Okay, I need to go back, then I need to go down. Sorry, I'm going to get there. What did I say? 274. So we're going to go back to 274. The Temple of the Sun is built in Rome. But then I thought, hang on, we're talking about 274, but what's 274 minus, what's 274 minus 12? It's because we're assuming that this may be, I'm not saying this is correct or incorrect. It's just that I'm just using all the exact dates and remembering the Gregorian calendar changed on the well, in 1582 we lost, you know, what happened was that, you know, well, it changed in 1582. We lost 1 year and 10 days. So the tsunami that happened on the 20th of January, notice 20th of January, 1606, where this tide comes in and floods the West Country in England. The tide comes up to the steeples, where you can still see the brass plates tapped to the top of the beams, or the top of the steeples of the churches, which is how high the water came in. And it didn't come in like a tsunami. It came in really, really slowly and came up and up and up. And it stayed up for 10 days and then slowly went back down again. It was the real meaning of the king tide, which is every time this goes by, we have a king tide. So 274 minus 12 is 262. So I thought, okay, well, if I was right, I was out in my last previous figure by a year, and let's just say, you know, just playing with these figures, if it was out and we go back a year and we take that to, we look at what happened in 262. Guys, this is going to blow you away. 262. earthquakes in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and 3 days of darkness. And notice the year before, a great plague raged in the Roman Empire. I mean, you just look at so much of the stuff that's going on. This model that I've built here is a fantastic way to get another view of, you know, this period of going over the top of the ecliptic. I call this the tribulation period. You know, I the only other person I know who's really bringing a timeline like this together is Gil Broussard, and it's going to be interesting to sort of like start comparing all of these dates, because that was that just basically, let me stop that and just bring you back to that, because that was all reached by that piece of paper. That just took me on a journey, and I thought, well, maybe we could start exploring that a little bit more. But it's taken me to somewhere else as well. It's because we have it's around about it's the 11th today. So we've got basically 20 days until supposedly we're leaving the EU under Article 50. Now, of course, I have to do something. I don't know exactly what I'm meant to do, but now it seems that if they do extend, you see, if we leave with that idea, it's going to be dramatically bad and terrifying for just everyone concerned. And I can promise you, it will be so drastic, because you have to understand what it is that they're trying to get you to go into here. And what it is they're trying to get you to go into is like a free trade deal, like the NAFTA free trade deal. And of course, you look at some of the horrendous kind of like, you know, Canada became the most sued nation on the planet as a result of signing that. It means that big corporations come in. You know, America's never lost a case against America. They call them kind of member state dispute systems or something like that. And it basically gives whatever you can do in one country who's part of the member state, who's a member state or a member of this organization, of this free trade organization, can do whatever. So whatever you're doing in America. So, like, for example, right now they are doing late stage abortions in America. So anything that signs a free trade agreement with America, you can lobby to do, and it wouldn't be against the law to do late stage abortions where you can actually terminate the baby on birth. And now that's what they've just allowed in New York. And you can imagine that though that might never really happen in New York, you can imagine that countries linked to the member state dispute system from other places in the globe, you know, that's giving the right to terminate a baby's life when it's first born. To break away from Europe is at this time so you can join a free trade agreement. You see, Corbyn's in a really odd position here, isn't he? He's in this kind of situation where he's not really saying much, but you see, he's never been a fan of the European Union, because he's recognised that though the European Union is good, it was that was the carrot at the end of the string, if you like, to get everyone to join in. But what the European Union is the euro, and the euro is obviously controlled by the bankers, and they've controlled this more through the European Commission than the European Parliament, really. So, and this is the dark part that everyone hates about Europe, is the European Commission, the bit that the bankers run, really, and the bit that is unelected. And this is the bit that people really most hate when they're talking about the part that they'd like to break up about Europe. It's the control of, it's the fiscal controls of the euro, the fact that all this money is actually really coming via the City of London and feeding 700 trillion equivalent to US dollars feeding into Europe via the City of London every year. And to walk away from this, obviously, you know, no one wanted in the referendum in France to join Europe. They voted against it, but France still joined because they were going to follow the money. And you can imagine that if Britain breaks out of Europe, there's the assumption that they're going to follow the money, and they're going to break away from the European alliance, and they're going to go and join. They're going to join a new free trade agreement, which will mean breaking away from Europe. It will break Germany, it will break all these different countries. And of course, the European alliance is what's saying no to genetically modified food, is what's saying no to things like sort of like late stage terminations. It's saying no to kind of like to fracking, to the most incredible things, because they're against human rights. So if we break away from the European Union, we break away from our human rights, and we become, and then if we sign a free trade agreement, as we're talking about, what's coming up, this what would be the free trade agreement, and then we can be used to get countries in Europe to sign up with us on the same free trade agreements, but they would have to break out of the European alliance to do so. But they, like France, might chase the money rather than chase the ethics here. I don't truly know, but what happens if they didn't? What happens if the Europe is more solid and more robust than we believe, and they're saying no, we're not going to do it. We are not going to get, we don't know how we're going to make it. We're going to have a massive loss. VW is gone. Porsche is gone. Mercedes is gone. These companies stop to exist in the same fashions as they do exist now, possibly. Who knows? There'll be a massive shortfall in business with Europe, from America and from Britain, if they don't sign up to these free trade agreements. And so I have 20 days left to kind of do something. And I've decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to come forward, and the European candidates, or the European representatives in MEPs in the Parliament, say there has to be an election if we extend Article 50. But the British politicians, I was trying to say that if they can get all of the member states to agree that we can veto that, but that's how they can get around it. And we could stay out of that, or just keep the existing elected politicians in office. But if there's distinct evidence that the people do want to be involved in that process, then there has to be an election. That's what they're saying. They're reaching out to us, telling us, if we show that we want to be involved in this, if we show that we want to be involved. And I'm a traveller. You remember they did the whole Brexit vote on the 23rd of June, 2016. That was just after Stonehenge, a massive pilgrimage. And then it was when the festival had begun. Also, it was obviously, ironically, when we had an exact transit. I made the video before and say, 23rd of June, this will be the time it passes. And ironically, I did it because I knew it fitted in with the timeline nearly, but the fact that they'd put the election right over that day meant there was a comet flying by. It was such a strategic point, because they drive wars, aggression, and division on these specific dates. That's what they do. And so, I'm just going to plug some power in there. Pone la piedras. Does that come on? Yeah. And then you obviously, as I repeat so many times, and then you put Tony Blair up as the main pro-Europe candidate with David Cameron. Tony Blair took us to war against Iraq. The French wouldn't even join in. They hate Tony Blair. Tony Blair has been traveling around France. He speaks fluent French, traveling around France, telling them the same as he told us, that it's vital they stay in Europe for the war on terror and all this sort of stuff. They hate it. The Hague is the only place that Tony Blair could ever get prosecuted for his war crimes. And yet he's put up as the main rep. It's vital you stay in Europe. And David Cameron, who took us to war against Libya with NATO and everything else like that, directly when Fukushima happened. And you're like, he should have been dropping aid on Fukushima for the people in Japan, not dropping bombs on Libya. Starting a war with Africa, creating this whole refugee crisis, which has been used as the very mechanism to make you hate Europe. This is what Angela Merkel was doing. She was like, they're fleeing war. They're fleeing the most dreadful conditions of what Britain, America, and NATO have done in the Middle East and in Libya. They're fleeing this. And you're saying that you've got to hate the European Union for trying to deal and tackle with the problem of these refugees arriving on the coast of Europe, coming across the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean Ocean is the most horrific ocean to cross in the world. It's I'd say it's the most horrific. It's one of the most horrific. It's much, much harder because, especially for a small vessel, like when the Atlantic is a big open, so you get big waves, but they're big, long, wide waves. But what occurs in the Mediterranean is you've got it's not landlocked, but obviously you've got access to from the Atlantic into the Mediterranean, and that creates enormous waves, and these bound off all the different land masses around, and they all come conflicting back in, and they create these very dumpy waves for very small vessels. They go up really high and then they go down low and they crash into the new oncoming wave because it's in so much closer proximity in the Mediterranean. So it's horrendous ocean to attempt to cross in a small vessel, and so many drown. It's the most horrendous. Of course, Angela Merkel wanted to give them sort of like give them places, and then of course all this shit's going down because of all everything with the story that we're in right now, that has all started as a result of all the war in Syria and the war in Iraq and the war in Libya and the war in Afghanistan and this war that we're seeing and like that we've seen perpetuated since the towers came down in 2001. And obviously before, Margaret Thatcher, I mean, it's just never ended really. In this cycle since 1939, there's been constant war. And you could argue that that's been true before that. But it has left me in this place where I've decided I'm going to run and I'm going to represent the travellers, because we didn't have a voice. I couldn't even go to Glastonbury on the 23rd of June. 2016. I couldn't go because I couldn't, as much as I couldn't be part of that festival, even though for all the love I have and everything else like that, they used that festival. It was like 49% remain and 52% leave, and yet the travellers couldn't be there because that's right over a sacred festival when we go from the Stones to Glastonbury, because Glastonbury has also become part of this sacred festival because of what Margaret Thatcher did in the Battle of the Beanfields, when she smashed up all the travellers' vehicles in Stonehenge and beat them all up, and they fled. And that was Joe Rush's debut in Glastonbury, when the whole mutoid waste thing kind of formulated. So much we've come from this great part of history ourselves. We've seen part of this whole story, and we've been involved in part of this great story ourselves, and seen how Stonehenge and the whole pagan festival was actually morphed and moved across into Glastonbury and around Stonehenge and his Carhenge and the new Stonehenge that was built up on the stones in Glastonbury as well. Also, to hold the Brexit Day vote when that the travellers who have no fixed abode, that can't do postal voting, there was no way they could be in the voting booths. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that are involved in these big gatherings of travellers, hundreds of thousands, the legitimate voters who could not vote because they could not. And then they were plagued with this concept that Tony Blair was saying, you have to stay in Europe, the one they hated most of all, the one that they put up to balance the expenses that Nigel Farage had been pumped to the very, very top. Nigel Farage, he was on every TV station, every radio station. He was constantly on the TV, constantly talking about Brexit. All the tabloids, all the newspapers were telling us evil Europe, bad Europe. And the only person, or the only people, Tony Blair and David Cameron, giving us you've got to stay in Europe. And you were like, I hate Europe. Of course you were. You didn't hate Europe. You hated Tony Blair. You hated what Tony Blair had done. You wanted to see him prosecuted. You hated David Cameron. You hated what David Cameron had done. It was nothing personal against him. It's what he had done. It's what they had done. It's what they had enacted. And as this time comes closer, if they take us out, there will be a crash. If we go to a deal, it will be terrible. If we try and do a deal, a free trade deal, we will lose the divine protection we are having against this system, and natural God-given protection that we get when we get very close to this system. If we walk away, we cannot. That protection cannot protect us, because we are choosing a God, a different type of God. If we decide to go into one of these free trade agreements, we truly give up sovereignty. If we do that, we have 20 days left to turn this around. And the way we can turn it around is by sending a message to the European Union that we don't want fracking, we don't want genetically modified food, and we don't want late stage abortions. And you cannot tell me that that will not come into countries that are connected, because it might not happen in Britain, because we might have the legal power to defend that. Other countries that will then have to join to tap into our great revenue, which is why the European Union was created. Really, that was the carrot on the end of the stick, being brought into this massive financial consortium and being part of that. But what we got out of it was being in a trade union with all of these other countries, so we could trade together and we could move freely, which has been an amazing thing. So there's been so much amazing stuff about the European Union that just to kick it all away and say, no, I want fracking, I want genetically modified food, I want true sovereignty to be absolutely rogered over the barrel. That's what you're giving away here. That's what you're looking at here. That's what William Burroughs called the naked lumps. That's what's really on the end of the fork. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will notify the members of the Electoral Commission, and I will notify the Electoral Office. And I want to tell you that my intention to run in the next European election, that I have the right to be in. I'm not breaking any laws. I completely stand in my democratic rights to stand and run in this election. And I'm going to come to Bristol and I'm going to make my case clear. I don't know where I'm going to park up, but I'm going to bring my whole rig, because I'm a traveller representing travellers' rights. And in this political framework, I believe that I have the right to come and park up within Bristol, because I'm expressing an opinion which has clearly been suppressed. The right of the traveller and the non-fixed abode voter who could not be in and around a voting booth at that time because they were in ceremony, literally. And I don't mean to make that sound any less than truly what it is. We were in ceremony. That is a sacred druid time where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of British people and people from all over the world, but British people come together to celebrate something which is archaic, which is way before Christianity, which is part of who they truly are, the true origins of their ancestry, where their genes come from. That was a sacred time. That was an illegal election, I would go further to say. But to hold it over that critical time, it was totally illegal. It was manipulated. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, I am now a candidate. And I want to also tell you that when I turned up in Bristol to run for Mayor of Bristol, the electoral, I think his name was Julian, but I can't remember his surname. But if I can find it, I'll try and put it up. His name was Julian. And he was one of the electoral officers, and he said, "What's your address?" And I gave him my number plate, and I wrote down Dove Street in Bristol, where I was parked up at the time. And he said, what's your postal address? And I said, my postal address is I'm just going to thank someone for bringing my water. Thanks so much for bringing my water there. I'm just in the middle of a chat. Someone's just bought me some water from Jean Blanc, pure spring water. Thank you so much for grabbing that.
Yeah, I'll see you. Well, maybe not tomorrow, but
I'll see you soon.
Yeah, definitely. See you.
Thank you, bless you.
Okay.
And he said, "But you need a postal address. You cannot run if you don't have a postal address. He said, that's the law." And I said, "But I don't have a postal address. I live in a truck." And he said, "You're going to need to find a way of someone that will let you do that." And I said to him, "Am I right in saying that our legal system is a precedent system?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it, yeah." He said, "I think it is." And I said, "So if your name appeared on that list, if you signed that, would you have broken the law? Or would you have set a precedent that recognizes the right of a traveller?" to run for a position of government. I said, would that be a precedent or would that be a violation? And he just signed it. He just signed it and said, well, he didn't really say that much. He just looked at me and he signed it. You can set precedents now, right now, with your involvement. So it's another long one. I am now officially out until I notify the Electoral Commission and in the House of Commons, and until I notify the electoral offices of the Bristol electoral office that my intention, I'm not a candidate. But I will tell you right now that I am a candidate for the European Parliament. I haven't raised the £5,000 that it costs to run, but I will begin that, and I will tell you that anyone who wants to donate to that has to specifically help me raise that £5,000. Has to all donations in for fundraising have to have your voting number to prove that you're on the electoral roll and that you can officially donate to a political campaign. So it has to have your voting number. So you've got to make an effort. If you want to donate and help me here, you'll have to make an effort, a voting number, as well with your donation. And I'm going to put a PayPal link up or try and get that together. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to try and get that together in the next period so I can justify that. And I ask you, anyone who wants to donate directly to that has to give me their electoral number. You can be anywhere in the UK to do that, to be part of that if you've registered your right to vote. I can't take for there's strict expenses rules for if you're running for government, and if I do decide to do this and take this, well, I'm doing it. No, there's no decide. I'm doing it. I'm making the video. I am a candidate. I am a candidate, and I will now write and send this video link to the necessary bodies. But I'm going to head back. I'm not too sure where I'm going to park up. It will be in a public place in the city. I can imagine there's going to be kind of you shouldn't be here and everything else like that. But we have 20 days left to make this case. 20 days left. I promise you, to save England right now for what it will go through. If you break away, all hell will be released for Britain. Things go very, very badly. Imagine this is a timeline, and imagine that in one timeline you chose to leave and you decided, and that somehow we've managed to come back and slot into this timeline to bring your awareness back and to maybe make a different choice and to stay and to be part of Europe and be part of this union and not go down this corridor of trying to join up to a horrible free trade agreement, which will have terrible, terrible, terrible repercussions on Britain. Genetically modified food, you name it, the most horrible, evil stuff. And you can reverse that right now by you actively getting involved in demonstrating that you want to be part of the coming European elections. So sorry for another long one, all because of a little cosmic. Sorry about that. Just randomly throw that one in there, but God bless. Shiva bless. It's great power is all around us at the moment, and you want to make sure you're not on the wrong side of that great power. And take the most peaceful route right now. And the most peaceful route is always unity. It's always unity. Yes, you have to make compromises, but unity with Europe Instead of, you go back and all these different times when this thing has flown by, Europe has just been in a constant state of one fighting another constantly. Famines and endless war driving one nation against the other. Since the European Union, you have been one mighty nation that has had total peace and prosperity as you've never, as like you have never seen before. Remember that. And remember, this is your last 20 days to demonstrate to the European Parliament that you are interested and want to randomly throw that one in there, but God bless, Shiva bless. It's great power is all around us at the moment, and you want to make sure you're not on the wrong side of that great power. And take the most peaceful route right now. And the most peaceful route is always unity. It's always unity. Yes, you have to make compromises, but unity with Europe. Instead of, you go back and all these different times when this thing has flown by, Europe has just been in a constant state of one fighting another constantly. Famines and endless war